said, my name is Dustin Grella. I'm an animator. What I was going to do today, I was going to take you through some of my first animations and like my first attempts, I'll say attempts at animation, into what it is, what I'm doing today. So we'll just kind of go through, a lot of it will be that process, kind of going where you guys were when I was testing and trying different animation techniques, as a student, and then kind of going through like my first narrative film. We'll watch that. Has anyone here seen any of my work yet? Couple? Have you guys seen Prayers for Peace? No? Okay, great. I was like, I'm gonna play Prayers for Peace, and I was like, maybe they were all seen it already, so that's great. So oddly enough, like I started as a 3D animator. I was like, okay, I want to do animation. I want to do at the time, Pixar was just starting to become the rage, and everything was like going towards this computer animation bent. And so I was like, okay, I want to be a 3D animator, and I got in there, and it was Maya was the software, and it was a nightmare. It was like walking through a landmine, like a minefield, because you never knew, like if you touched one button, it was gonna like propagate through the whole animation and crash everything. You never really knew what you were gonna get. And one of the things that you did was you set up a keyframe A, and then you set up a keyframe B, and then you hit the render key, and computers were slower back then, so you would go home, and then you'd come back the next day, and you'd see what the computer rendered. You would make some changes and render something else. And so what I wanted to do was I was thinking about it, and I was like, what I'd really like to do is be the renderer. Like find out, like I'll do something by hand and render each of the frames by hand, which I thought was just like just a crazy idea. In fact, it had been the only way animation had been being created for the previous 100 years. But I was deep inside the world of the computer. So what I'm gonna do, and oddly enough, this is so crazy, Dragna is here, and some of the work that I'm gonna show is from the studio that we shared together 15 or 20 years ago. So it was, it's kind of exciting to have you here in the room. Like this piece that we're looking at right now, this was in the same studio she was at, which is great. So I'm gonna kind of go through this a little bit fast. It's gonna feel fast, but so these first 12 that you're gonna see are all tests. They were test animations that I did that I was trying to just be that renderer. So what I did was I had a camera, and I set the camera up with an intervalometer, so it took a picture every 60 seconds and snaps that photo. And then I was over here, and at first I had a chalkboard painted piece of plywood, and I painted it and I drew with chalk on that chalkboard. And whatever happened in that 60 seconds, and it kind of, when I'm drawing, I kind of lose myself in that drawing process. So I knew that I could sit there and I could draw for 6 hours, and then realize, oh crap, I didn't snap the photo. Like I only have 1/12 of a second of animation finished today. So by having this camera on an intervalometer, it kind of forced me to like, okay, you're done, move on. Okay, you're done, move on. Okay, you're done, move on. And so we'll watch through those. So this is the first one, and it was just an eye blinking, and it was a couple seconds long, I think 2 seconds, and I didn't know how to work the camera. I didn't know what an exposure was. I didn't know what an aperture was. I didn't know what any of the things were. And so we set up my system that I used, and I took all the photographs, and I went and looked at all the photographs, and everything was pitch black. So I took them to my professor, and I was like, hey, everything came out black. So he brought them all into Photoshop and made them these very grainy, but even seeing that eye blink, I was like, something, like I can go somewhere from that. So I tried it again, and I did this one. I was still using the chalkboard, or the painted chalkboard at this point in time. And then I kind of kept going. This one, I also did by myself. This one, so this one was the very beginnings, like this balloon that kind of moves across the sky. That was like at the start of animation. I was like, okay, I've figured out some animation. I did this one about my brother who was killed in Iraq, so this was like the first one that I did. I did like a longer narrative piece based on that. And you can see that the size, everything's this square. I brought over a buddy who was a painter, and he had no problem with color. He just like started picking up the colored chalks and started using colored chalks, and I was like, oh my gosh, colored chalk. Like, you can do that? I'm like, oh my gosh. So this was a party that I had where I just did the same thing. I set up the timer, and I had people over, and they drew and did stuff. This is the factory that we were in. This is the B.F. Goodrich factory, which was, B.F. Goodrich had long since retired and went away. And so it used to create a bunch of tires and cars, pieces and stuff like that. So this light over here in the corner was this kind of breathing light into an old factory. This one I did also, I hung up the slate in a gallery. I invited people to come, and oh no, actually this one I did with another guy, and it was really weird. I want to show you this. It was really weird because I was trying to collaborate with people, and for him and I, if you see this line right here, no one ever goes on the other person's side. So he went home, and I got this guy out, and I walked over onto his side. And so it was like kind of I don't know, it was really weird. I've never had a collaboration where it was like oil and water, where you just don't even touch each other. It was like very, very different. And then this was the one where I hung it up in a museum. I was trying to make it, or in a gallery, and I was trying to kind of make it more of an event, like this. The camera's on the timer, and you're doing this thing, and you're interacting, and you're also doing this drawing, but you're also doing animation, but you also have something at the end of the day. And this person, I don't know who did that rat, but they did a really, like that rat over in the bottom corner. Some guy asked if he could dress up like a penguin, and so I said, of course. He definitely did something like a penguin. So he did a penguin dance. And then after the tests, I was like, okay, I felt like I was ready to do something a little bit longer. So that's William de Kooning. And he was like an abstract painter, and so I used him as like, I went to my buddy and I said, hey, do you have any music? Because he was a musician, and he was like, yeah, I've got this and I've got that, and he had everything was like these real heavy hip hop beats, and like it was like real heavy beats, and I was like, it didn't really work for what I was doing. And then he pulled this piece out, and he's like, well, what about this? I was like, oh, I love it. And he was like, oh, that's good, because that's Willem de Kooning in the beginning. So I used references from his paintings and stuff like that, and I did the same thing. I just drew for like 9 months. Whenever I go into the studio, I just kind of sit there and I draw on top of drawings, on top of drawings, on top of drawings. And you can kind of see where some of the breaks are, where I kind of stopped for a little while and I was coming back, trying something new. And again, like I said, at this point in time, I hadn't really done animation. I didn't really understand the principles of animation. I didn't understand, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just kind of going and trying things and experimenting. And I've said this a million times, but really, that while you're in school, this is your opportunity to make as many just horrible mistakes as possible. Like, it's really, this is that time to try different things and fail and maybe make a modification on that failure and try something else and try something else and keep, just like play, basically. And because there'll be times when you're not allowed to make those mistakes, and it's just like a different life. Can you still hear me back there? Okay. So this film, and there, this is an edited version. It was like 9 minutes at first, and I cut out all the scenes because I was like, oh, every frame is important, and so I had all of these frames in there that were just like, maybe nothing was happening, or like I went out to get a pizza and I came back and I left the camera running, so there was just like all this dead space in there. And but while I was doing it, I was learning different things and trying different techniques. This was a bunch of pastel particles that I just noticed at the bottom they were stacking up on each other, so I just kind of stacked a whole slate. So you can tell it's winter now because I've got a hat. I had a bird in my hand, and I was like, if I like pick up my clothes and just have the bird on then it'll be like the purity of the bird. And even when I watch it today, I'm like, I still don't even notice the bird in my hand. Like, there's very little to do with the bird. So this is my own theory on multi-tuning. I'm not going to get into it here.
I had finished something. That's the beginning. And I find myself staying with it.
So from there, that was at pretty much the end-ish of undergrad, and that was a film, I was doing my undergrad studies. That was the classes I was taking, and then this was just something I was doing on the side. So it wasn't part of any class. I didn't have a teacher telling me what to do. I would take it in and show it to people sometimes and get feedback and like kind of like figuring it out. But I was, on some level, I felt like I was figuring it out on my own. And then there was a show that was involved that was part of the finishing of that piece. And I took almost exactly like what we've got in the gallery right now, is I've got the animations on the back wall where you can watch the animation. So that's how that one was displayed. And then the slates, so you could walk in the gallery, you saw the slates, and you could look at the slates for what they are. And then you go and watch the movie that we just watched. And then as you leave the gallery, you notice that these slates, like that one very colorful one, that was one of the slates. I think the one with the alien, the rainbow mouth, that was one of the slates. So those were part of the show, so you could it kind of made a little bit more sense when you're reading them. So then I moved to New York, and this was one of the first animations I did there. kind of communicated what I needed through my work, through this animation. And I had a Tribeca loft for 5 years that somebody was like, oh, hey, we need an artist to live in this giant Tribeca loft. And so now that I'm watching it, I'm like, wow, that really worked. So I'm gonna show you Prayers for Peace on a different version, a little bit better quality. So then that one was non-narrative, like the glimpse, the Willem de Kooning film, that was non-narrative. So then this was what I tried for my thesis film. I had an idea that I was gonna do this whole installation where I was driving around and taking pictures, and then Google Maps came out, because I was gonna like take a constant picture of everywhere I drove, and I was gonna drive all over the place. And then Google Maps came out, which was doing this thing where they were like doing street view, and I was like, wow, they really, not only did they do my idea, but they did it really much better than I ever would have been able to do it. So I just let Google kind of do their thing. But then, so I switched back to animation, and this was like my first narrative animation. And I'll let you watch that one all the way through. Let me know if you can hear it at that.
This morning I walked past a church with a sign out front that read, Prayers for Peace. Stretching the entire length of the church was a wrought iron fence with long, thin yellow ribbons draped across so thick that they looked like ties in a clearance rack. I noticed that some of the ribbons had names attached. As I walked down the sidewalk, I thought the ribbons must be for donors or sponsors or patrons of the church. It was one of those beautiful old stone churches on Fifth Avenue. The front of the church was long, and the ribbons were many and bright and dancing in the December wind, so they easily kept my attention. I read another name tag. This one was of a soldier. The third, also of a soldier. That was when I realized that these must all be names of soldiers who had died in Iraq. Thus the yellow ribbons, thus the Prayers for Peace. I stopped. I started searching for PFC Devin J. Grella. There were thousands of ribbons. I wasn't going to be able to just randomly find his. But then I saw that they were in sort of an ad hoc alphabetical order. Greca, Gonzalez, and after a long while, Grella. A heavy cold wind blew through me, tossing the ribbons high off the fence. I don't think of him that often anymore, even though it has only been 3 years, even though someone in Iraq was just killed yesterday. Someone's son, someone's father, someone's husband, someone's friend. I miss him. I wish I could say I think of him more often than I do. I wiped the tears from my face and started walking back down Fifth Avenue, crossing through Madison Square Park. I thought immediately of the soundbite on the laptop that came when his personal belongings were returned. I thought about that sound file, guns firing in the background, his innocent 21-year-old voice, oddly more mature since he'd left for Iraq 3 months ago. An IED, or improvised explosive device, would be detonated beneath his diesel tanker days later, killing him instantly. his personal effects. We were in the funeral home, closed casket wrapped with a flag on the other side of the room. We all huddled around the monitor as if we were looking into the eye of an oracle that could deliver us a message from beyond the grave. There they were. Pictures of Devin and his friends, videos of soldiers in a sporting boxing match, and a sound file of him delivering a tanker of fuel across the Persian desert. We listened to it over and over. We wanted to know, to be a part of, experience what his life, a life that we all knew so well before he'd left for Iraq, was like those last few months. We knew that he was somewhere, but it wasn't until we heard the machine gun fire in the background that we realized he'd been off in a very foreign place. Maybe before that we didn't want to know. Maybe we were in denial. It definitely made it easier to sleep at night. At that moment, gathered around, listening to his voice, I tried to imagine Devin as something I'd never considered him, a soldier. I knew him as a little brother, an athlete, and a sports fanatic, a musician, slightly girl-crazed and able to spend hours gaming, but never a soldier. He'd only been there 3 months, hardly enough time to ride back home. He'd only been in the army for 6 months, and honestly, I'd never really spoken to him about it. It wasn't how I identified him. But here at the funeral were hundreds of men, dressed in uniform, straightening collars, and saying what a brave soldier my brother was. And there I was, keeping my mouth shut, for fear of dishonoring him. Take a minute to listen to the sound file, the last known recording of my brother Devin before he was killed.
I don't know if you can hear this or not, but I'm on top of my truck right now, really out. And it's crazy, there's a few minutes in the background. Like, we're not far from that at all. When I first got here, there were bombs and stuff going off, and they were shooting trace rounds right over our head. We were parked here, we're just looking for somewhere to drop this trailer.
So obviously I did that one for Devin, but I also did it at the time, similar to what it is now. The people were very divided. There was the good guys and the bad guys, or the bad guys and the good guys. And nobody got along, everybody was, they'd wait and listen to a story until they figured out like which side you were on, and then it was a good story, or it was a bad story, and we liked it or we hated it. And so I was watching the news, and the news was, 4 died in Afghanistan, 2 died in Iraq, and now the sports, Cleveland Browns got 14 points, the Cleveland Indians got 3. It wasn't registering as people. Even though it was the news telling this thing, it was registering more almost along the lines of sports scores, instead of actual humans that were dying in a war that were somebody's family members. So I did this film to kind of try to personalize the war, which just really wasn't personal at that point yet. Since then, this was 2009 when this was finished, so since then there's been a lot of people that have come home and told their stories and done that. But at that time, it really hadn't been wasn't super personal yet. And so when I was making it, I had a bunch of, my idea, the people that I had in mind to watch it, the audience, were people like my parents. And my parents have lived in Ohio. They live in Medina, Ohio. They've lived there for 50 years or something. They go to the movies every Friday night. They buy a bin of popcorn and a Pepsi Cola, and they watch that. They watch whatever the Friday night movie theater has posted for them to watch. And so I knew, and that was who I was trying to communicate with, was just like the average Americans per se. And so I knew that the chalkboard was a little tricky, and it wasn't what they were used to watching when it came to a movie. So I did the first couple shots very slow. Like the first shot I think is 1.5 minutes. The second shot is like 1.25 minutes. And the third shot is like 45 seconds. So I've got these really slow shots so they can hopefully start looking at the story and start listening to the story instead of getting hung up on the visuals of, oh, that looks different from what I'm used to looking at. This is weird, I don't like it. I wanted them to process the story before anything else. And then I had all these heavy-handed political jabs in there, and I just pulled all those out because it wasn't the time or the place to talk about any of that. It wasn't my purpose was to make some political statement. My purpose at that point was to tell a story about, my brother who was killed in war, and in that way personalizing what was going on. There's also a shot in there where I say I walked through the park, and clearly I'm not walking through any parks. However, most of the people that watch the film don't know me personally. You guys get, I'm in front of you so that you know who I am. And I didn't want that loaded image. That's such a loaded image to have a wheelchair in a shot. It was like, oh gosh, is that, back then it was like, oh, is he from Vietnam? Is that did he get hurt in the war? And I didn't want anything to try to distract from the narrative that I was trying to tell. So all your images, everything you say, everything you put on the screen, every single pixel that's out in there has to be accounted for and paid attention to.
Can you run upstairs and get Angela, or text her?
Okay. I'll just keep talking.
Yeah.
So that was my purpose for the film. That was what I was trying to do. That was what I was trying to accomplish. And it did well. There was the GI Film Festival in just outside of Washington D.C. They played it, and they were like, this is a great portrait of a soldier. And then the Woodstock Film Festival played it, and they were like, oh, this is so great. This is just this perfect story of the perils of war. And so by pulling politics out of it, it was no longer our side versus their side, good versus bad, we like it, we hate it. It made it palatable on a human level, and people were able to watch it for that purpose. Do you guys have questions so far? There's a question over here.
Is that 60-second rule something that you follow throughout all of your artwork, doing the 60-second intervals with the camera, or do you change that?
Up till now, yes. So this was still done with that 60-second rule. So you can see that boxing scene. So that didn't have a lot of detail in it because there was so much moving every frame that I only had enough to capture just okay, this is moving and that's moving. Let me change those two things, and then I got out of the way, and then I looked at it again. Okay, this is moving farther, and that one's moving, and something was moving out there. So it was just it was almost patches of movement.
When did you realize that water was also an important Because I see that you incorporate that a lot as its own medium.
It was just like, on some level, it's just like a filler. Realistically, like when my arms are tired and I'm exhausted, I know I can like fill up the board with water and let it dry and record that. And it takes about 10 or 15 minutes, and it's, you know, it has 5 or 10 seconds of
Filler time.
filler. But people love it, and people love, you know, they're like, oh, my favorite part was the drying. I really love the drying aspect of it. That's what, you know, and somebody it comes, you know, they really love that part, and I never say, oh gosh, yeah, that's when my arms were tired, I couldn't draw anymore, and I just wanted fillers. But it was something, it was another technique. And realistically, with any kind of artwork, honestly, but with animation in particular, because it's such a laborious process, and you're taking so much time to do so little reward, you start learning the cuts and the cheats and the quicker ways of doing stuff, real often. And that was just one of those techniques that were super helpful. Hey. Other questions? Is there another question?
How do you even storyboard something like that? Like what is like your logic behind like transitioning from just like illustration that's completely different to something that's like this beautiful different scene? How do you even think about that?
So up until Prayers for Peace, I hadn't storyboarded anything.
Really?
So that was all, it was all just stream of consciousness. So I'd just get up there and start drawing something, and then if I was like, oh, that looks like a cat over here, then I'll draw like, I'll turn that water splotch into a cat.
Do you like reference any imagery or like?
For the wool de Kooning one I did. So for that one I was like kind of using a lot of his.
So you just freehanded like that whole thing?
Yeah, so that one was definitely freehanded. This one, Prayers for Peace, so I was also learning. I'm trying to do a narrative for the first time. I'm trying to do something visually that people aren't gonna be like, well, that was like, you know, playing in the back of my head was like, my mom's comment on the Will de Kooning thing. Oh, that's nice, but it's not my thing. It's just, it's a little weird, you know, it's a little weird. And I was like, okay, like, I'm fine with that. Like, that wasn't for her. That wasn't like trying to communicate anything to, you know, Dennis and Donna from, you know, Americana. It was, that rhyme. It was trying to, but this next one was, like, I was definitely trying to communicate something other than like, you know, visual colors and playing and experimentation. So for that one, that whole film was rotoscoped.
Really?
So the whole thing was like, it was like a system that built that you turn the camera on, you turn the thing on, you take the thing, it was like remote controls and pushing buttons and advancing frames and doing all that within a minute, you know, and drawing something. So that part of it was part of the process. It's much easier now that I know. I've got almost that entire system. Oh no, I lost it again. Oh. I'm sorry. What? I think that was my spaceboard. My space.
So Prayers for Peace was one take, you didn't have to do that multiple
Yeah,
times?
you didn't have to
Or
do
did
like
you have
three
multiple
versions.
scenes that you could do?
No, so what I did for that one, so Prayers for Peace, that one I did storyboard, but it's so few frames, or so few, you know, shots, really. So I did it in like 15 minutes or 20 minutes, because I knew, like, it took such a long time to like put it together that I knew exactly what, like, I was visualizing it while I was doing it. I was like, okay, I know exactly what this is gonna look like when I'm putting it together. I know exactly like what shots I wanna do. The only shot that I didn't have was that last shot of like, and it was so weird how it came about. Like, that last shot, I didn't have it the whole time. And the whole time I made it, I didn't have it. And I called up my uncle and I was like, hey, do you have any of that, do you have any old footage of Devin? So he went through his entire archive of home movies and did like a supercut of all the shots of Devin, which was like 6 hours of footage. So I watched through 6 hours of footage, and by then I was exhausted of watching home. You know, it's fun for like the first 15 minutes or maybe a half hour, and then after 6 hours, you're just like, oh my gosh, I have to watch another football game where nobody scores. Oh my gosh. And so I like was kind of I was kind of like zoned out, and my friend was standing behind me, and she was like, oh my gosh, Destiny. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she was like, dude, the thing, the needle point. So that shot in the end is actually, it's actually a actual video from Christmas. And for his very first Christmas, my grandmother gave him a needle point of a little soldier boy. And so I was like, and I didn't even notice it because I was so tired. I was tired of watching videos, but she picked up on it, and so we like rewatched it. And it was like, there's all this kind of like, when I watch it now, I'm like, oh, that sounds so corny, because it's like, you know, it's like grandma in the background, like, oh my gosh, and I hear my uncle like, oh, no, like everybody's like, you can hear everybody doing the Christmas thing. Like when you open a present, everybody goes, oh, I'm like, oh my gosh, look at that. So I'm sorry, I swear, I'm gonna keep it going. I'm just talking, I'm just jamming over here.
Yeah, he needs
I'll
an
keep it going.
assistant.
We're almost done. What time is it? 3:43?
Yeah.
How late should we go till?
Probably till 4, including questions.
Okay.
Is that enough time?
Yeah, that's more than enough.
That, the last video, prayers for peace, one, kind of hit a little too close to home.
This one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was, I mean, that was the point. That was its purpose, was to, you know, get people to resonate with it on some level.
In the compiling of your slates, is there any after effects that you add in terms of like digitally to compile them, or is everything just your handiwork?
So at this point, it was all, you know, I was like a purist. Like I couldn't break free from ever doing anything that wasn't me drawing with my actual hand on the slate. Nobody else was allowed to draw. Nobody else was and it was all also about like capturing whatever that image was to make sure that that was the image. And so I didn't even do like color correcting and stuff like that. Now, different story. We'll get into that. So that's like, this was just coming out of grad school. So that was like my graduate school project. And then out of grad school, I had I was kind of one of those things that this did really well. It, you know, it was because it was about the war. Everybody wanted to talk about the war. Everybody wanted to show it. It was personal. It was this. It was that. So it did really. It traveled the world. It did, like she said, like 200 festivals. It won 49 awards. And so I want to say it won almost 50, but I'm like, no, it won over 40. So it was like, but it was right there, right at the precipice of 50. But it just did really well. Like it played and people talked about it, and it was, so I had this, you know, whereas before I didn't have to, I was just playing and I was just experimenting and I was just trying new things. Well, I spent the next 2 years just submitting it to festivals and having it do its thing, terrified about my next project. So I didn't, because I now had, there was this bar, and I had to one up that. I had to do something, you know, this was 7 minutes, I had to do something that was at least 15 minutes, maybe like 24 minutes, or maybe like a feature length, like I had to do it longer, and I had to do it better, and I had to win more awards, and it had to be, so that need to succeed, that need to do it right, that's why I'm like, just love being in school, because you you get to make the mistakes, you get to play, you get to experiment.
Don't let that fall asleep again.
Oh, good job, alright. Nice,
It's all right.
Nice save. And you get to, like, now's the time to make those mistakes. And so what that did, that need for, like, to do something perfect and to do something better, and it paralyzed the creativity. It, like, stopped it dead in its tracks. And I couldn't do anything. I wouldn't even touch the slates. I wasn't touching anything, any new projects. I wasn't doing anything because I had to do a perfect project. And that's a terrible way to start a project, in making it be perfect. Having that pressure to do perfect. In fact, I couldn't. In fact, I didn't. I ended up not doing anything bigger and better. So instead I was like, okay, I do want to still make some stuff. Like, I still love drawing, I still love animation, I still love what I'm doing. So that was when I came up with this idea to do something shorter, do something smaller, do something, content-based, but more playful. And that's when I started doing those animation hotline videos. And because they were quick. I could do one in an afternoon. I could try something new. I could experiment. I could throw it away if it sucked. And nobody would care. Nobody knew any better. Nobody, it wasn't like they were, being judged on any level. So I started doing those, and I started doing one a day. For the first month, I did one a day. And I was able to do one a day for about a month, but then I started getting sick because I was like, it was actually more, I overworked. I overextended myself, and I was like, oh gosh, I gotta kind of keep this up. And I physically, I just couldn't keep it up. But let's play some of these. So these are much shorter. These are, this is probably, maybe 5 years into the project. So by this point in time, I had some that were documentary, some that were poems, some that were abstract, some that were just nonsense, some that were some guy calling at 4 a.m. drunk, talking about whatever. So I had all these different stories, and so this one, what we're gonna see now is a series of just the documentary ones, so just the real live stories that were screen given.
Day at 11:27 a.m.
I beat down a 24-year-old kid on the tennis court this weekend. I gotta tell you, at 53, that felt pretty good. Actually, it hurt like hell afterwards, but it still felt good.
Next message received 1:50 p.m.
I started to get gray really young in my 20s, and I started to diet. When I was about 35, I was married, and I said to my then husband, you never say anything nice to me. And he looked at me and said, okay, your hair looks like a wig. And instead of getting hurt or angry, I thought, oh, I guess it's time to rethink the hair. And I let the gray come in, which is not easy, because first it looks like a skunk stripe of white. Now I've had silver hair, as I like to think of it, for 25 years, and I'm happy with it. I like silver. And I later divorced that guy anyway.
Next message received May 9, 4:52 p.m.
I'm so terribly excited today. I just signed up for the bike share program. I was in Paris, and I got to do that a couple of years ago, and it was one of the most wonderful, magical evenings of my life. I sang riding around on the rental bike. Anyway, we're going to do it here with so safe. I gotta get myself a helmet and, oh, I guess I don't have to get a lot, but I haven't ridden a bike in New York City since I was a teenager. I used to ride my bike from the apartment on North Moore Street up to work at 921 Broadway during the summer, 10th grade and 11th grade. And that was old-fashioned New York. Streets were filled with detritus. There was certainly no bike helmets or bike lanes. And we were bankrupt. I guess we had just come out of bankruptcy. It was feudal New York. It was feudal era New York. Now I'm gonna ride my bike in civilized New York. And I'm excited.
Next message received, 3 p.m.
I have a confession to make. One like, around 10 years ago, I was really walking fast, in the fast pace on 8th Avenue. And there was this man on the corner near the traffic light. And he asked me, sir, can you help me across the street? And then I noticed that he was blind. And I said to him, no, sorry, I'm not going that way. And then I walked away. And I still feel guilty about that. But I'm not an asshole anymore.
Received at 3:18 p.m.
When I was 17 months old, I had double pneumonia and I was in the hospital. And inside my oxygen tent, I always felt like there was somebody with me, like there were people in there with me. And the nurses told my mother that I was the strangest child I'd ever seen because I never left the oxygen tent. I just sat there with my eyes wide open looking at everything and never cried or got out of bed. And my mother didn't believe that I really remembered this until I was an adult, and I told her that when I was in the tent with all the people that were in there with me, which I think might have been my ancestors, my grandfather or my great aunts or my grandmother or whatever, that I told her the plastic had a yellowish tint to it, and I remembered being wheeled out of the hospital in the wheelchair with my dad and stopping and buying a stuffed basset hound in the gift shop as a reward for surviving. And when I told her about the plastic being yellow, her mouth dropped open and said, there's no way you can remember that, you were 17 months old. And I said, well, no, I remember it.
Received Tuesday, 5:35 p.m.
These are actually all available. There's 177 of them in the gallery. So if you guys want to go watch these, it's not a super cut for documentary ones only, but there's a ton of them in there. And so I started doing these based on these phone calls. So the way this project started was I had these business cards printed up, and they had this phone number on it, and I moved, and back then everything was landlines, so I lost my phone number, because I moved. It was in my old apartment, so I actually called the phone company. I had them turn that landline. I kept the landline active, and then I just had them turn it into a voicemail. So I didn't want to waste that number that was on my business cards, because that would suck to have to scribble that number out and rewrite your number on all the business cards. So I used that number. And one of the animator's dilemmas is content. So if you're doing narratives all the time, then I have a couple of good stories in me, but I don't have millions or an infinite amount of good stories in me. You can kind of turn anything into a good story, but when it comes down to it, every single person in this room has at least one good story. And there's that one story that's all right, I don't know the people at this table, and this is the one that's both funny and insightful and explains me a little bit. I'm gonna tell that story. I'll tell that story, and that'll be the one that, that one's my go-to story. So everybody's got one of those stories, or a couple of those stories actually. So I was like, okay, I can set this phone number up and have people tell this story, and have them, I can have anybody tell any of their stories if they want. And it can also be timely or topical. If something's going on, then they can talk although they're, you know, they are my like pet project, they're also little advertisements for my work, for my animation, for the tests, for my, you know, for little things. So when I'm trying different techniques, and if I have a client that's like, oh, I want, you know, I'm really thinking about like fuzzy bunnies, I'm like, oh, try this one. Like I'll have an animation that I've already done about fuzzy bunnies, or I'll have an animation that I did about the Rubik's Cube, or I have an animation that I did about all these different things. And it also gives them a chance, and they'll say, oh, I love the animation hotline. And I'll say, what specifically, like which animation hotline specifically spoke to you, and why? And then I'll have like some jumping off point as to like, this is where our conversation can go, and why. So on some level, like this project also helped my design or my commercial career, which I have to eat. I have to eat, I have to pay the rent, I have a dog, the dog needs food, the dog doesn't have to pay rent, fortunately. But I have expenses in life, and if I was smart, I would have gone into finance or healthcare, honestly. I was thinking about it, but instead I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make money from my art. So I had to figure out a way to transition, like these are my skill sets, these are my talents, this is what people need, and a lot of times they need to communicate to their clients, or they need to communicate to their audience, and that's what I'm doing, is communicating. So I just use this tool that I've learned and I've honed to be able to help them communicate with their people a little bit more. We've got 2 minutes for a question. 1 minute for a question. Anyone? We got one in the back.
Whenever you're filming and you know you're 60-second rule, have there ever been times when you would do a couple, or when you would start drawing one, you didn't like how it was going and you would start over, or you would stop there, erase the board, and then start again, or do you just go with whatever happens?
So for these animation hotline ones, the 60-second rule went out the window. Like we do those in Illustrator, we'll do them in Photoshop, we'll do them in, you know, we'll do a lot of it on the chalkboard, we'll do a screen grab from Google, we'll do whatever it takes to kind of like, it's all just about play and experimentation. So the 60-second rule doesn't work there. For the first one that I did, I just kept going. I never went backwards. There's one cut in Prayers for Peace where honestly, there was this shot where I was trying to draw the family with the baby, with the soldier painting at the end, or the needle point. And, sorry. It's okay, it's over. And that part, I was like, oh my gosh, like I was trying to get my mom's face, and I'm like, this is wrong, this is so wrong, this is terrible, like, and I couldn't get it, and I was super frustrated, and I went back and I looked at it, and animation's such a strange thing that you're not actually looking at the drawings, you're looking at the motion, you're looking at the changes, the actual changes from one to another. So you never really stopped. So I went back and I watched it, and I never once looked at her face. There was something red that was moving over there, and I was like, oh, color. I followed that thing moving through the frame, and I never once looked at her face, and I was like, okay, yes, if I stop it frame by frame by frame, she looked like a monkey, like a lot like a monkey. I was like, oh my gosh. But I knew that wasn't what the audience was gonna see. That wasn't what the audience was gonna do. So on some level, I kind of just go with it. So, and I'm not doing the kind of animations. I'm not doing, a Cartoon Network animation where you have to nail the character and there's like character sheets and a Bible that everything has to hit perfectly every time. That's not what I'm doing at all. So fortunately, I don't have to like something as an audience, we're expecting these things. And so, by breaking rules all the time, sometimes the audience will be like, well, I can't follow this anymore because you're not following enough of the rules to, communicate what you need to. Although hopefully, I feel like I'm communicating more on an emotional level than on a technical level. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. Alright, thanks guys.